Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast, How to Integrate Data into Your Hiring Process. This program is part of the SHRM webcast series. You can learn about upcoming and on-demand events from our e-newsletters and the webcast homepage at shrm.org/webcast. SHRM thanks Cangrade for sponsoring this program and our series of free webcasts for the HR community. Now about today's program. Are you having trouble scaling up your high-touch approach to recruiting? You want to become more data-driven, but you're not sure where to start. Today's program will give you the information you need to kickstart your transformation journey. To lead our program, we're pleased to welcome Jen Rifkin, the Chief Customer Officer at Cangrade. Ms. Rifkin leads client partnerships to optimize the value of Cangrade's solutions. Her main focus is on ensuring that the company's tools and analytics drive a positive impact on clients' success metrics and bottom lines. With introductions complete, I'm pleased now to turn over the webcast microphone to our speaker, Jen Rifkin.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joining us here today. We have a lot to cover on today's webinar, but I want to just cover the main three topics that we're going to be discussing today. So starting off, how do you know if you made a bad hiring decision? I think that's something that's on everyone's minds when they're going through the hiring process. How do you use the right data to make a good one instead? And lastly, how do we make that leap to being data-driven? So that's really what today's discussion is about. Before I get into these topics, I want to start us off with a quick poll. So moving on to our poll, which of the following priorities would most benefit your organization when it comes to hiring? Is it making offers more quickly, hiring candidates without bias, finding candidates who will stay, increasing offer acceptance rates, or raising KPI numbers post-hire? Now, I know that a lot of these are probably top priorities, but for the purpose of this poll, I encourage you to select one. So think about the one thing that really keeps your organization up at night when it comes to hiring. I'll give a few moments for people to answer here. Now, we love a good poll because this is how we integrate data into our webinar process. So we're a really data-driven organization. And again, there's no wrong answer. So just pick the one that really keeps you up at night. All right, I'm going to give a few more seconds, capture as many responses as possible. Okay, looks like we have a lot of people submitting their answers. Okay, hope everyone locked in their response. All right, finding candidates who will stay is really the one thing that's keeping people up at night. Making offers more quickly is obviously very important to everyone, hiring candidates without bias, but especially in this hiring climate and this labor climate, finding those candidates who will stay wins by a landslide. So why are we here talking about this today? Why is this important? Why do we have so many people who signed up for this webinar? Because hiring is a high-stakes game. It's expensive. And making the wrong hiring choice is very expensive. So how expensive is it? For every mishire, the cost estimate is 2 to 20 times that of an annual salary. And in US businesses alone, voluntary turnover costs companies over $1 trillion. So it's critical to find those candidates who will stay. And a lot of times, the things that we can't measure are really the opportunity cost of missing out on that great candidate. So hiring the wrong person who either leaves or underperforms. So I want to take a minute to look at some of these critical points of failure that often occur in the hiring process. And I'm going to be breaking down a lot of this presentation to pre-hire and post-hire. Well, what do I mean by pre-hire? What do I mean by post-hire? Pre-hire is really your candidate experience, your applicant experience, your recruiter experience, the process of going through hiring. And post-hire is once you make that offer, it's the employee experience, the manager experience, once someone becomes a part of your organization. So let's look at pre-hire first. 2 critical points of failure: your candidate declines or you miss out on a great candidate. Post-hire, you hired that person, they either underperform, they quit, or both. All right, I want to break these down one by one. Starting with pre-hire failure number 1, your candidate declines. You find the right person, you think they're great, but they've already accepted another job offer. Or you offer them something and they say, no thanks, I think I'm looking for another opportunity elsewhere. Now, why did this happen? Could have been too slow to make an offer. You could have had too many points within the hiring process, too many hoops that people needed to jump through in order to actually get to the interview. Or it could have been an unappealing offer. You could have lowballed them, when really you would have been willing to offer them a lot more. Or the interview process itself was off-putting. Now, it's a two-way street. You're interviewing a candidate, but yet the candidate's also interviewing you. I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10, when a person applies to a job, you're not the only job that they're applying to. So looking at that other point of pre-hire failure, you miss out on a great candidate. Now, oftentimes this happens because you're really looking at the wrong things. You're qualifying people on the wrong things and you're disqualifying people on the wrong things. So focusing on the wrong red flags, focusing on the wrong green flags, or overall just screening too subjectively. You don't actually know what you should be looking for when you're hiring your candidates during the hiring process. Now, it's really when you miss out on that great candidate and you hire the wrong person, that's where we get to those points of post-hire failure. So you hired someone, you think they're going to be great, you put them in the job. Day one, they might seem great. During training, they might seem great. But when the rubber meets the road, this candidate underperforms. Now, why? Maybe they don't have the necessary hard skills, the necessary soft skills, or they just aren't being managed correctly. Management isn't easy. There's a lot of different people, a lot of different dynamics, and oftentimes managers are people who performed very well in the role that they were in before and were then promoted to manager. Now, that last common point of post-hire failure, your candidate quits. So the thing that's keeping people up at night, really keeping people for the long run in the jobs that they're hired to do. Now, there's really 3 main reasons for this to happen. And the biggest trend here, it's bad fit, right? So bad fit with the manager, bad fit with the role, or bad fit with the culture of the organization. They get into the job and they either don't like doing it, they don't feel like they're treated with respect, or they don't feel like they're set up for success in the position that they're hired for. So these are really the most common points of failure, right? There's other things that can come into play here. But the problem is when we assess points of hiring failure, humans are not great at assessing any one of these. Why is that? Because humans are filled with bias, right? It's our human nature. We don't do it to be malicious. We do it because it's deep-rooted in our way of thinking to make decisions based upon experience or bias so that we can make fast, easy, quick decisions. So think about what this means for your HR, right? Sometimes you have a phone screen or an interview and you think, wow, that felt good. That person feels like they could be a really great fit. When you're hiring and you're making recruiting choices, your day-to-day is filled with choices that can be affected by this bias. You're essentially the gatekeepers of the organization. You're deciding who is that next person that's going to be joining our team. So how do we make those decisions better, right? Keeping them smart, keeping them fast. We rely on data because data can be systematic, it can be objective, intuitive, comforting, quick, or accurate. But I caution you, data can be biased too. So what do I mean by that? I think a lot of people on this call have heard the story about Amazon. they decided to build their own AI looking at previous hires to predict the success of potential hires. So they built this on their existing workforce, which was predominantly male. And when they fed this information into their AI and built those algorithms, the algorithms came back and said, male candidates are the best hires. Now, luckily, they didn't actually go ahead and use this for any of their hiring. But if a company like Amazon can make this kind of mistake, you think there's not a lot of hope for the rest of us. So I caution you, bad data can be worse than no data at all. And that's why data transparency, if using data in your hiring process, which we encourage you do, is critical. So I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity here just to give a shout out to the Cangrade science team. We recently have a patent now for removing bias in the hiring process. So it's something that we're really excited about, near and dear to our hearts. And if anyone wants to learn more, you can check it out at our website. So I want to get into some of these data-driven approaches. Not all of these data-driven approaches are created equal. So I'm not necessarily talking about the metrics of your hiring process. I think those are critical, but they don't necessarily help you find the right candidate. So what I want to do is take some time to look at what are those data-driven approaches that can help you find the right person who will be a high performer and who will stay, the holy grail. Well, some of the most common approaches that we have are things like phone screening and reference checking. And I want to start here. This is what we call our pseudo data-driven approaches. Now you'll see on the next couple of slides that I have a little chart. And in my little bar chart, it's something measuring predictive validity. Now, without getting too much into the science of this, it's really about what percentage of the time do you hit the nail on the head? How predictive are each one of these data-driven approaches? So things like phone screening, reference checking, this is data that we're collecting on the candidate as they go through our process. Now, they can give us a lot of information. Do you like the person that you worked with before? Were they a good fit for the job? Or do you meet the minimum requirements? Are you willing to travel? Why did you apply to this job to begin with? Now, this is a lot of information you can learn about the candidate, and it's intuitive and it's comforting. You can hang up the phone at the end of your phone screen or hang up the phone at the end of your reference check and say, I think that's someone that I want to move to the next step. That felt good. Well, that's also the problem, right? These approaches are subjective. It felt good. They're ineffective, 3% predictability with the phone screen, and they're time consuming. Every time you pick up the phone and you have a call with a candidate and you're only yielding that 3% back, there's got to be a better approach. So this is what we refer to as our pseudo data-driven approaches. It feels like data, it feels comforting, but it's not necessarily. So I want to move on to the next one. The next common approach I want to talk about is really our single data point approach. It's one piece of data that tells us, does this person meet the minimum requirements? Is this someone I should be moving forward with? Things like college GPA or job experience. Now, college GPA only has a 3% predictive validity. That's not going to get you very far. And colleges actually calculate GPA in different ways. So although it's a cut and dry number, it can honestly mean different things for different people. Now, when you look at job experience, I think everyone's seen or written a job post that says, this job requires someone with 5+ years of management experience. It seems valid, it seems systematic, but just because someone had 5 years of management experience doesn't necessarily mean that they were a good manager. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they can manage your teams in your environment to service your market and your culture. So what's another problem with these single data point approaches? They're ineffective, right? They're biased, no post-hire utility. So they feel good, they're common, they're used all the time, but this is not the best way to integrate data into your hiring process. So I want to get to some better approaches that you can use. And these are also becoming more and more common each day. You have your data-driven pre-hire assessment approaches. This is data that you can collect on your candidates as they go through the hiring process that really can be a stronger predictor of whether or not someone is going to be successful in this role. So for the purposes of this presentation today, I really want to talk about 3 different types. You have your aptitude, your hard skills, which is really your technical know-how, and then your soft skills. And if you look at the predictive validity of these 3, you see that we're actually getting somewhere with these. So these are much more predictive of candidate success and potential success of each of the people going through your pipeline than those other approaches that we looked at previously. So looking at each one individually, starting with aptitude. And why is aptitude a poor assessment strategy? It had a higher predictive validity than some of the other methods. It's common. There's a lot of tools out there on the market. Well, it's inherently biased. Just because I can choose, so which shape comes next in a pattern of shapes doesn't mean I'm going to be a good fit for the job. It doesn't mean I'm going to be fulfilled with the job. It just means that I'm either good at picking shapes or I've likely Googled the assessment. Now, if you do wish to use an aptitude test in your pre-hire strategy, I caution you one thing. Google to see if you can find the answers, because oftentimes these are the ones that are easiest to game. So the next approach that we look at is hard skills. Now, I don't necessarily want to say this is a poor assessment strategy, right? Cangrade has a full library of hard skill tests. We wouldn't use them if it wasn't valuable. But sometimes they fail to capture the richness of workplace success. So if you think about it this way, you're hiring a developer. I mean, of course you're going to use a hard skill assessment in some way, shape, or form, right? You don't want to hire a developer who thinks that, Python is just another animal in the animal kingdom. You want them to know that there's different types of coding languages and to at least have some basic proficiency of this. If you're hiring someone for a bilingual role, well, you might want to test to make sure that they can actually speak French or Spanish or whatever other language they're required to speak. But oftentimes what I see with companies when I work with them is that they fall into this trap of hard skills. They want to put too many hard skill tests in the assessment process. So what do I mean by this? Let's say the job requires you to be writing emails, or the job requires you to use some sort of documentation. Well, they'll want to just use a typing test or a writing sample. And let's make sure that people are proficient in English grammar and punctuation. The problem is by adding too many of these steps in the process, people are going to leave. They're not going to make it through to the end. And you're just going to have to train them on the soft skills. So rather than assessing your candidates for writing samples or proficiency in Microsoft Word or Outlook or typing testability and typing speed, measure them on communication, the ability to communicate, or attention to detail. The types of things that are harder to train when somebody is on the job. Now, why is this important? Because if you hire people for the right soft skills, they're going to be satisfied in the job that they're in. People want to come to work each day to feel good about the work that they do, to feel valued about the work that they do, and they want to feel like they're in the right job. Now, you can train people on a plethora of different skills, but it's much harder to train people on the right soft skills. So if there's anything that I want you to take away from this presentation, and there's a lot of things that we talk about today, it's critical that your pre-hire approach is data-driven and soft skills focused. Because with those things, it results in a better recruiter experience. So be more efficient, more effective, and making the right hiring decisions, and a better employee experience. You're hiring the right people for the right job who feel good about the work that they do day in and day out. So again, talking about pre-hire, we're talking about the recruiter experience, the candidate experience. How can data and soft skills, those two critical components that should be included in your hiring process from start to finish, improve that pre-hire experience? Well, like I said, it decreases time to hire. It makes you much more efficient and much more effective as recruiters. And it allows your candidates to go through the process much more quickly than if they were to have to jump through all of the hoops of doing multiple hard skill tests, phone screens, you name it. It widens your candidate funnel. You can actually look for people to hire who may not be your typical candidate that you would go after. And I think in today's hiring climate, that's critical. And lastly, it can increase your acceptance rate. Candidates who go through the process will say, wow, that company actually cares about me as a person. You know, I'm not another cog in the wheel. I'm a real person with real abilities, and to make sure that I'm the right fit for this job, they're making sure that it's the right job for me. What does that mean in terms of post-hire? So looking at those two critical components, data and soft skills. How does that improve your post-hire experience? Well, it ensures a great role and culture fit. It drives engagement. It makes people the right person for the job. And it supports professional development. One of the biggest drivers of engagement is really letting people know that their company cares about them. They want them to succeed. They want to be coached and trained and developed so that they can stay with the company for a long time. And that's also seen with those manager coaching tips. So as I mentioned before, two critical components if you were to walk away from anything today from this presentation. It's using data and soft skills through your hiring process. So that's a lot to take in, right? It seems easy, I'm talking about two things, but what does that actually look like? Now, I want to show you a little bit about how Cangrade does this. It doesn't mean you need to use Cangrade, it just gives you a place to start. So the way that Cangrade utilizes data and soft skills is we actually use KPI data. We want to know, what does success look like for your employees in your organization? Not some benchmark data or some big data role. We want to know your organization, your KPIs. And it's important for you, if you take this approach, to look at the full range of performance. Because as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to disqualify for the wrong things, and you don't want to hire for the wrong things. So know what to hire for and what not to hire for. So with all of that information, personality traits and soft skills, KPIs, we're able to run that through our AI to determine what are those soft skills that drive success. So the critical component here for us is really KPIs. So I want to take a minute for a poll. How many of the roles in your organization track KPIs to measure success that serve as objective performance metrics, not subjective performance reviews? And so I think that key word in this question is objective performance metrics. So not, I like them, they were a good fit, I recommend them for promotion, but really looking at cut and dried numbers. Would you say it's all of the roles in your organization? Most of the roles? Some of the roles? A few of the roles? Or none of the roles? Again, there's really no right answer. And I think depending on the size and the resources that you have within your organization, or even how closely aligned you are with some of the other departments and other roles within your organization, doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are going to have objective performance metrics. Some roles just aren't easy to measure. So I'll give everyone a few more minutes and pick the response that really fits your organization. All right, everyone can lock in your final response here. All right, 31% a few of the roles, and 28% say some of the roles. Now, we do have 24% with none of the roles. I encourage you, if there's anything you could do to find those objective performance metrics, I recommend it. That's the first place to start. But it's really rare within an organization to have all of your roles have objective performance metrics. And when we work with our customers, not all of the roles have objective performance metrics. Also, not all the roles have enough people that we can actually reliably use the data to identify the soft skills that drive success. So whether if you don't have KPIs or if you don't have enough people in the role, there's still an approach that you can use to determine the soft skills. Now, we refer to this as our expert input approach. That's pretty self-explanatory. You have your experts, the people closest to the role, say these are the soft skills that are most important that we should be hiring for. Whether it's someone who's been in the role, whether it's someone who manages the role, or whether it's a superstar that you've had in the role who says, you know what, this has really helped me along the way to be able to multitask, for instance. Well, if you don't know where to start, I encourage you, go to www.cangrade.com, and we have something called a job description decoder. You don't have to use Cangrade. You don't have to sign up for a subscription. You don't have to talk to me or any member of my customer success team. But what you can do is take a quick survey. And it's a survey about the job that will give you back the soft skills that you can use today to start hiring for. If you are going to take the approach of using soft skills in your hiring process, there's a couple of critical components. This needs to be instant. You need to find a way to effectively and efficiently put this into your hiring process, because you don't want this to be another long, drawn-out step. I know that there are some assessments out there, so whether you use Cangrade or someone else, that can actually be 50 minutes to complete. Not every candidate you have is going to be willing to put in an hour of their time to apply to a job that they're not guaranteed to get. Now, once you identify these soft skills, this is an opportunity for you to also make it systematic. A way to remove bias, not only from your hiring process, but from your interview process. If you can identify those critical soft skills, you can systematize your interviews in a way that isn't going to let people decide which questions to ask. You know, there's a type of bias called the confirmation bias, and that's one of the ones that creep in most often. And what this does is it essentially says, you know, if I like someone to begin with, I'm going to find more reasons to like them. So you might find yourself unknowingly asking some more questions about a candidate's strength. Or if you don't like them and don't think they're going to be a good fit, maybe you start asking more questions about their weaknesses. Having these critical soft skills allows you to be more systematic within your hiring process without letting bias get in the way. Now, when it comes to making your process more appealing, if you can learn about your candidate's soft skills, learn about what motivates them. Use that to pitch them a job offer. Talk about the things that they're good at. Maybe they might be more inclined to say yes. Taking it a step further, use this motivation to also help to keep them engaged. People are complex, people are dynamic, not everyone is the same. Employee engagement programs are not one size fits all. Tailor this to each of your candidates so when you do hire them, they're going to want to stay. And that's the same with development tools. So you can train people on hard skills. And although soft skills are much harder to train upon, it's worth it. Take the time, take the effort, and identify those key soft skills that are really going to take people from being great performers to superstars. So I've covered a lot so far in this presentation. And I think what's critical to really take away is that making your hiring process data-driven, it's not easy, but it's worth it. All right, so this is the last poll in our presentation. And I want to get your feedback here. To which would be your biggest obstacle in implementing a data-driven process? Now again, pick one. There's no right answer. Is it getting buy-in from your leadership team? Getting adoption from your recruiters or your hiring managers? Defining KPIs for the roles? Integrating with your applicant tracking system? Or getting candidates to complete a pre-hire assessment? Now again, give everyone a little bit of time to respond to this question. We're always curious to hear from the people that we work with what their biggest obstacles are. Give everyone another second or two. Lock in your final answers. Now, I'll know if I don't get a lot of responses to this question that I've lost a lot of you to lunch, emails, multitasking. So I hope everyone takes the time to answer to those questions so I know you're still with us. All right. Final answer, defining KPIs for the roles. It's tough. It's not an easy job. And I think oftentimes as recruiters or hiring managers or HR professionals, it's not necessarily in our wheelhouse to define KPIs. You know, we're not scientists. The next one, getting buy-in from leadership or executive team. How do you tell them that this is important, that this is critical, that this will help them to make their organization more profitable by hiring the right people who are going to stay? So these are some of the things that I would expect to see. And I think definitely things that are worth really making the jump for. So we know that becoming data-driven can be challenging. What do we need? Well, it's a change management process like any. And you can't do this in a vacuum. You can't do this alone as an HR professional. So you really need buy-in from leadership. You need leaders to be able to support this as a critical initiative within your organization to be more data-driven in your hiring process. And to be more data-driven in your hiring process, you really need help from the people who are currently in the role. It's employees, people managing the role, or other people in your organization who aren't necessarily involved within that hiring process. And that really requires a commitment to change. It's not just another flavor of the week. It's not something that we're just testing out, but it's something that we're really dedicated to doing. But the biggest thing that you need in terms of really becoming data-driven is a clear definition of what success looks like. Because that's also going to be critical in helping you to determine what's most important when it comes to hiring, what KPIs are most critical, what soft skills are we hiring for, and what is the end goal that we're trying to get at the end of the day. So that clear definition of success. When we work with our customers, that's really the place that we start, right? You start with the end in mind, because otherwise you're just grabbing at straws. So if you're not data-driven, is your organization doomed to fail? No. But it can result in some negative impacts. It can make your hiring process long and drawn out, where you lose candidates along the way. It can limit your candidate pool. And in today's hiring climate, that is probably something that I hear over and over again, is that there aren't enough candidates, especially for some of the roles that you're hiring for that you're back on premise. Can't get enough people who want to come into the office. Now, the most negative impact of not using data in your hiring process could be an EEOC lawsuit. So you could have struggles with your hiring process But worst case scenario, it turns into a legal field. So again, we're talking about things pre-hire and post-hire. So what are some of the negative impacts that it can have on your employees by not using data in your hiring process? Well, you're not hiring the right people for the right job. They don't have the personality. They don't have what it takes. It doesn't excite them. It doesn't thrill them because it's not within their wheelhouse. So it might result in poor employee performance. People might want to leave. People might say, this isn't the job that I signed up for. Or they don't feel fulfilled on a day-to-day basis, and they decide to go look somewhere else for a job. And with the high cost of turnover and the high costs involved in hiring, this could result in dwindling profits for your organization. Now, all of this is critical to take to your leadership team when to say, this is why we need to implement data into our hiring process. These are the critical components, because it's not just about talent acquisition. It's not just about HR. It's about our organization as a whole. It's about when people apply to the jobs, we want them to know that we care about them. And that carries over from the hiring process all the way into their day-to-day employment. So rounding all of this up, and I've talked about a lot of things today about being data-driven. Really, what are those key critical components that it boils down to? Why is a data-driven approach so critical to help you with your pre-hire? Because it can reduce your time to hire, make you more efficient, increase your candidate acceptance rate, make you more appealing to the candidates coming through, widen your candidate funnel, so give you the opportunity to look at more non-traditional candidates without screening people out by college GPA or years of experience. And it can lead to more equitable hiring decisions. So if there's anything to take away from today, using soft skills and data-driven, these are those key critical components why. So you take this to your leadership team and tell them, this is why it's critical for us to do this. Now, when you look at that post-hire, right, what does this mean for our employees? You hire someone, we're able to find the right person, the right fit for the job. Why does this approach actually help us in the long run? Because you're finding people who are going to be good at the job, who have those personality traits, who have those soft skills that are most critical to success. It's going to help you to increase employee retention. People want to be good at the job that they show up to do day in and day out. Now, they can be trained again in Microsoft Word, or they can be trained again in email programs, or maybe they're a really fast typer. But if they struggle with that communication, or if they struggle with multitasking and aren't able to navigate between different screens, or if they struggle with, attention to detail and continue to miss things out, they're not going to stay very long, because those are key critical components that weren't necessarily implemented in your hiring process or screened for in your hiring process. Now, why else? Because it can help you to identify development opportunities. If you know someone needs help with multitasking, you can help them, coach them, give them the tools that are going to make that individual more successful in the job and to be cared about by the organization. So I'm not going through cut and dry training, but I'm going through ways to really make me be a better professional. And then last but not least, all of this ties down to your bottom line. It boosts company profits. You're finding the right people for the right job who are high performers, highly engaged, and therefore saving you money at the end of the day. Now, again, I've gone through a lot of stuff during this presentation, a lot of different material. So I want to sum it all up. So data can be used in hiring for a lot of different things. And using data will turn these potential points of failure, so both pre-hire and post-hire, into your critical components of success. I want to thank everyone for their time today. If you're interested in learning more about Cangrade, give us a call and set up a demo. Check us out at www.cangrade.com. And again, I encourage you, if you need a place to start, check out our job description decoder. It's free, no commitment, our gift to you, as we believe so strongly in using soft skills in your hiring process. Now, if you want to learn more about me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me there, and we're happy to follow up with anyone else interested in learning more. All right, Mike, ready for questions?
We are, and we will turn to audience questions in just a moment. This program is sponsored by Cangrade. Cangrade's AI-based software enables HR to be a strategic business partner that drives results. By seamlessly integrating data into talent management processes, Cangrade helps make HR accurate, efficient talent decisions from initial screening through promotions with 10 times more accurate predictions of talent success than traditional hiring methods, and a 0% chance of introducing bias. To learn how Cangrade can help you make data-driven hiring decisions today, visit cangrade.com. And we'll start with this one from a viewer who asks, when you were speaking of data bias, you mentioned a patent that Cangrade had for removing bias from AI. Can you talk more about this?
Sure, absolutely. I could talk all day about this. This is something that we're really excited about at Cangrade, as we're one of the few assessment organizations that actually have a patent in this regard. So what we do in terms of our patent is we're actually able to identify whether or not our soft skill profiles, which we refer to as a success model, favor one demographic group over the other. So we actually look at all different groups that are EEOC protected and beyond. And the way that we do that is really through a large data set. So we look at our big data and we say, is anyone going to be favored by this success model? And we never release any of these models that if anyone actually has favored one group over the other. So in the case of Amazon, that never would have gotten past step one for us, because that's something that we do as every model that we create. So we do have more information on our website. I encourage you to check that out. And if you want a more detailed description, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to talk about this all day.
Another viewer asks, how can we trust AI?
That's a tough question. You can't. Don't trust AI. But as I mentioned during one of my slides, it's all about data transparency. So what is the data that you're actually feeding into your machine learning algorithms? And being able to know what information and what data points are being fed in is the best way to know what kind of information is going to come out of it. Machines are smart. They make decisions faster, smarter, better than humans can. But the problem with AI is it learns on the information that we give them. So like the case in Amazon, if you're feeding it information that is predominantly male, or if you're feeding it bad data, it's not going to know any better. It's not going to be able to identify that this is really the issue. So it's critical to look at that data that you're putting into the machine learning so that you can be sure that bad data isn't going to give you bad results. It's a good question.
And kind of on a related tone, we've got a viewer who asks, how would you recommend we go about implementing AI into our HR processes if we've never used it before?
Absolutely. I think with any change management process, it's really about, like I said, starting with the end in mind. You need to be able to first know what is it that you're trying to achieve. Using AI for the sake of AI isn't going to get you very far. It's an exciting buzzword, right? It's something that everyone really wants to use today to stay relevant, to stay competitive, to stay innovative. But oftentimes, like I said, there can be bias in AI. So if you are going to implement AI, know exactly why you want to start using it. What is it that you're hoping to get out of it? And then find a company that you can trust. So it's critical to work with an organization that has reputable resources, maybe talk to any of their previous clients, or any that have a patent in removing bias from the hiring process. I couldn't help myself. But it's critical to work with a company that you know you can trust, do your research, do your due diligence, and really start with an end in mind.
Some questions that have come in about screening and screening strategies. Viewer asks, how do you make sure candidates are answering in an honest way and not trying to show a different personality?
Yep, absolutely. I think that's really why soft skills are the best approach, because candidates don't necessarily know the answers at the back of the book, right? They can guess. So if it's a sales role, you'd think, oh, well, maybe I need to have the personality of someone who can build relationships. And that might be a giveaway, but it's going to be different for every organization and every role. So when you go with personality, it's not an easy way to give the answers at the back of the book. It's not something that you can Google, right, to look for the answers, to find out which is the next shape in the pattern of shapes that we're asking this question on, or what is that Excel function that I need to be able to know to go through the hard skill test. So by using those personality traits, it's much harder to game. Now, a lot of different assessment vendors out there have some ways to be able to check and make sure that people aren't gaming it. But sometimes if you try, you might actually just be shooting yourself in the foot. You might actually be looking for the wrong things that actually aren't going to be the most important things to be hiring for. So I encourage you, soft skills are the best approach, harder to game, harder to know what to choose for, and tell people up front that they should be honest and open with their responses, because that's going to be the best way to get through the assessment.
We put together a couple of questions that came in about screening for soft skills. One of our viewer asks, how do you phrase questions to check the soft skills? Another viewer asks, what is your recommendation when it comes to evaluating soft skills? Do you use some kind of grading?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that Cangrade typically does it is we try to ask a couple of questions a couple different ways. Again, not to give the answers at the back of the book. So we want to be able to learn more about a candidate's preference. Do you like to do this on a day-to-day basis? Do you enjoy doing this? Do you find yourself putting patterns together? Or is it your preference? Or even thinking about asking questions in the negative way? Do you avoid trying to do certain things? So whatever the soft skill might be, think about some of the questions that really dive into the person's preference, so the person's personality. And those are really going to be the best ways to get at it. Now, I encourage you to do this systematically, finding a way to ask a question itself that doesn't have bias. So also making sure that the questions that you're asking about a person's soft skills aren't going to necessarily be gendered in a way. You know, there's a lot of questions that you can ask that might actually, the question themselves become more biased than the assessment overall. So that's a good question. We'd be happy to help if you want to learn more. There's a lot of resources online available. And yeah, this is a great question. Thanks, Mike.
Another viewer asks, what are your thoughts on in-person interviews versus remote interviews? Can you get the assessment data and insight you need if you're only interacting with the candidate on screen?
Absolutely. For us, and one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that a lot of times bias can really creep into the interview process because that's where humans are most susceptible. So again, if you're leaving it up to the human decision-making process, you might find yourself making a decision on a candidate based upon whether or not they wore shoes that you liked to the interview, rather than the person's qualifications. There's a lot more things that can come into play when a person shows up in person. Not to mention, a lot of the jobs that people are hiring for today are still remote. So to be able to keep the process quick, efficient, and reliable, using a screening tool. I mean, using things like Zoom or using things like any other programs that you have, Microsoft Teams, whatever it might be, to conduct your interviews are actually going to be a great approach. Because as long as those interviews continue to be systematic and you're asking questions about their strengths, asking questions about their weaknesses, and not being able to sort of go off the fly to let your human intuition and your gut feeling tell you who's going to be the best candidate, you're still going to be able to capture that critical information that lets you know whether or not someone's actually going to be a good fit for the role. So absolutely, do it virtually. The world is practically virtual these days. So just be sure that you have a systematized interview process and you're using structured interviews, because otherwise that's where that bias can really creep in.
A couple questions here about KPIs. How many KPIs does a typical role have? And another viewer asks, are there specific KPIs that should be on every potential hire list, regardless of the roles?
That's a great question. KPIs can be different for every role, every organization. There's not a set number of KPIs that you need in order to measure job success. And some of those KPIs might not even be performance-based. Some of the KPIs that you can use are actually going to be retention-based. You can use level of engagement as a KPI. You can use tenure as a KPI. There's a lot of different information that you can use, but it's going to be subject to the role that you're looking at. Now, this is also one of those critical things to look at in terms of bad data is better than no data. If you find that your KPIs are subjective, if you find that your KPIs are actually favoring one group over another, that's where I'd encourage you not to use those KPIs, to look at other KPIs that you can use to really measure what job success looks like. And that's what we're talking about when we say KPIs, right? We're talking about those key performance indicators that tell us, is somebody good at their job? Who are those top performers? And when you look at what top performance looks like, it starts to paint a clearer picture of which KPIs are actually indicating that that person is a top performer. So when you look at KPIs, look at the full range of performance. Don't just look at top performers. Look at top performers as a guide, but also look at your bottom performers to say, well, what are the things we want to avoid? And so by understanding performance of that particular role, because it's not cut and dry for everyone, it's not going to be the same for every role that you work with, but understanding what success looks like in a way that doesn't introduce bias into your data is a way that you can start to define those KPIs. Now, if you're a hiring professional or if you're a human resources professional, sometimes you don't actually have that insight into the role that tells you, hey, this is what my top performers look like. So this is where you really need to lean on other people in your organization, those people closest to the role. So if it's managers or some of the other superstars that you have, to say, what does success look like? How are you measuring success? And really make it a strategic partnership between your hiring teams and between the roles that you're hiring for. Because you can't necessarily do this in a vacuum, right? You really need their buy-in and you need their support, and you need to make sure that you know exactly what drives success. What are you looking for? And you're not hiring on your gut feeling, or you're not hiring for people that you think could be a good fit, but really having the data that's critical, the data points that you need to know that you're hiring for the right team, for the right people, for the right management style, for the right team culture. And so you need to be able to partner with other areas of the organization in order to determine what those KPIs look like.
See if we can squeeze in a couple more questions here. Audience member asks, we're a small business. How do I know if my recruiting process is mature enough for a solution like yours?
Yep, that's a great question. And that's where I actually encourage you to go check out our job description decoder. You know, maybe you don't need the AI that can be used for your hiring, but you need to know the soft skills that you're going to be hiring for. So I encourage you to check out our website. If you don't have an applicant tracking system, it's something that we can help with as well. So we'd be happy to talk to you. We work with small businesses, large businesses alike. And then hopefully we can help to grow your organization to be one that really requires AI in your hiring process. So thanks for that. That's a great question.
And we'll close here. Actually, a couple folks have asked where on the website they can find the job description decoder.
Absolutely. So if you scroll down, I believe halfway, there is a pre-hire screening tools. Click on our pre-hire screening and that will bring you to the job description decoder. Or feel free to contact us either at sales@cangrade.com or jen@cangrade.com and we can send you an exact link.
All right, thank you. We are coming to the end of our program. Before we sign off, we want to thank Jen Rifkin from Cangrade for the information she provided today. And we want to thank everyone tuning in for being with us and for choosing SHRM for HR webcasts. That concludes this program.